In 1939, dozens of beachgoers on the coast of South Africa watched a massive 17th century ship glide silently across the water in full sail. The vessel appeared so close they could see the ancient rigging and tattered canvas catching wind that wasn't blowing. Children pointed at the ghostly ship. Parents stood frozen, unable to explain what they were witnessing. Some grabbed cameras, but by the time they focused their lenses, the ship had begun to fade. Then, in seconds, it vanished completely. The witnesses weren't drunk, they weren't hallucinating, and they definitely weren't alone. For over 300 years, sailors, naval officers, and even royalty have reported seeing the same ghost ship, a Dutch merchant vessel with blood-red sails that appears before storms, bringing death to anyone who lays eyes on it. The ship always appears in the same waters, off the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, the most dangerous shipping lane in the world. The Flying Dutchman is the most documented ghost ship in maritime history. Hundreds of sightings, dozens of credible witnesses, multiple entries in official naval logbooks. But here's what most people don't know. The legend might actually be based on a real captain, a real ship, and a crime so horrific that it cursed an entire crew to sail the oceans forever. The story begins in 1650 in the port of Amsterdam during the Dutch Golden Age. The Netherlands was the richest nation in Europe, and the Dutch East India Company controlled the most profitable trade routes in the world. They shipped spices, silk, tea, and gold from the East Indies back to European markets. A single successful voyage could make a captain wealthy beyond imagination. These journeys were brutal. Ships would sail south along the African coast for months before attempting the most dangerous leg, the passage around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. Sailors called it the Cape of Storms, the place where the Atlantic Ocean collides with the Indian Ocean in a fury of wind and waves. Massive swells towered 40 feet high during storm season. Hurricane-force winds could reach 80 miles per hour, tearing sails to shreds and snapping masts like twigs. The Dutch East India Company lost dozens of ships in these waters every year. Thousands of sailors drowned, their bodies never recovered from the deep. Captain Hendrick van der Decken commanded one of these merchant vessels. Historical records suggest he was a real person born in 1720s Netherlands. His family went bankrupt when he was young, creating an obsession with wealth that would define his entire life. He joined the Dutch East India Company at 16 and commanded his own vessel by 25. Other captains called him reckless. His crew called him obsessed. But the company valued him because he made the journey faster than anyone else. In 1680, Van der Decken's ship departed from Amsterdam, loaded with valuable cargo destined for Batavia, modern-day Jakarta. The voyage started normally until they reached the Cape Colony and prepared for the passage around the Cape of Good Hope. Van der Decken's first mate warned him that storm season was approaching. Other ships were delaying their passage. Van der Decken refused to wait. Every day of delay cost money. A storm rolled in from the Atlantic on April 4th. Dark clouds blocked out the sun. The winds hit 70 miles per hour within minutes. Waves towered 30 feet high, crashing over the deck. Van der Decken's crew begged him to turn back. The first mate pleaded with him, pointing out that the rigging was failing, that men would die if they continued. According to the legend, Van der Decken pulled a pistol and threatened to shoot any man who questioned his orders. The most disturbing version says he screamed that he would round the Cape even if it took him until Judgment Day, even if God himself tried to stop him. The ship pushed forward into the storm. The masts cracked under the strain. Water poured over the railings, dragging sailors overboard before they could scream. But Van der Decken wouldn't relent. He lashed himself to the wheel and steered directly into the mountainous waves. The ship's carpenter reported hearing Van der Decken cursing God as the storm reached its peak, challenging the divine to strike him down, daring heaven and hell both to stop him from completing his voyage. Then the ship disappeared. Witnesses on shore claimed they saw the lanterns go dark around midnight. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors washed ashore. The Dutch East India Company listed the vessel as lost with all hands. 147 men gone without a trace. It wasn't. 3 months later, another Dutch merchant ship was rounding the Cape of Good Hope when the lookout spotted a vessel approaching from the south, sailing against the wind. At first, the crew thought it was another trader. Then they got close enough to see details that made their blood run cold. The ship was ancient, its design from decades earlier. The sails were torn and rotting, hanging in tattered strips that somehow still caught wind. The hull showed massive damage, as if it had been smashed against rocks repeatedly. And standing at the wheel was a figure in a captain's coat, his face locked in a grimace of fury and madness. The crew recognized the ship. It was Vanderdecken's vessel, the same one that had vanished in the storm 3 months earlier. They tried to signal, waving lanterns and shouting across the water. The ghost ship didn't respond. It sailed straight toward them, and the crew braced for impact. But the phantom vessel passed straight through their bow as if it were made of mist and moonlight. Sailors reported feeling a wave of cold air as the ghost ship phased through their hull. Then the apparition vanished into the fog, leaving the terrified crew to wonder whether they had imagined the entire encounter. Except they hadn't imagined it, because 2 weeks later, another ship reported the exact same sighting. Same location, same ghostly vessel, same spectral crew. And this time, something worse happened. The ship that saw the Flying Dutchman sank 3 days later in calm seas. No storm, no explanation. The vessel simply started taking on water and went down with half its crew. Word spread quickly through the maritime community, carried from port to port by sailors who swore on their lives that the stories were true. Other captains began reporting similar encounters, always near the Cape of Good Hope, always before a storm or disaster, and always with the same ghostly crew sailing a ship that shouldn't exist. The legend of the Flying Dutchman was born, and it terrified every sailor who worked the Cape route. By the early 1700s, the story had evolved into a complex mythology. Sailors developed rules for what to do if you encountered the phantom ship. Never acknowledge the vessel, never wave or signal, above all, never accept anything from the ghostly crew. Because the Flying Dutchman would sometimes try to make contact, rowing longboats across the water to deliver letters and packages to other ships. These letters, according to the legend, were addressed to people who had been dead for decades. Messages written in languages that no living person recognized. If you accepted these cursed letters, you would be doomed, and your ship would sink within days. Or worse, you would be forced to join the phantom crew, sailing forever on the ghost ship without rest or release. The only escape was to refuse all contact and sail away as quickly as possible. The most famous sighting came in July of 1795, and it involved British royalty. The HMS Bacchante, a Royal Navy vessel, was sailing near the Cape of Good Hope as part of a training mission. Among the crew was Prince George of Wales, the future King George V of England, serving as a young midshipman to gain naval experience. It was 4 a.m. on July 11th when the watch officer spotted something impossible on the horizon. A ship was approaching from the southeast, glowing with an eerie red phosphorescent light that seemed to emanate from the vessel itself. The phantom ship appeared to be fully rigged with sails set, moving at impossible speed despite there being almost no wind. As it drew closer, the crew of the Bacchante could make out details. An old Dutch design, decades out of date, tattered sails that shouldn't be able to catch any breeze, and a crew of shadowy figures moving about the deck in complete silence. The officer of the watch called for Prince George and the ship's captain. All 3 men watched as the ghost ship crossed directly in front of their bow, close enough that they should have been able to hail the crew. But when they tried to signal, the phantom ship gave no response. It simply sailed past, bathed in that unnatural red glow, and vanished into the darkness as if it had never existed. The ship's official log entry for July 11th, 1795 reads, "At 4 a.m., the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. A strange red light as of a phantom ship all aglow, in the midst of which light the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 yards distant, stood out in strong relief as she came up on the port bow." This wasn't a rumor or a ghost story passed around in taverns. This was an official entry in a Royal Navy logbook, witnessed and signed by multiple officers and a future King of England. But the horror didn't end with the sighting. Hours later, at 10 in the morning, the sailor who had first spotted the Flying Dutchman fell from the foretop rigging. He plummeted 70 feet to the deck and died instantly from the impact. The crew was convinced that the ghost ship had marked him for death. Prince George himself later wrote about the incident in his personal diary, on describing the phantom vessel and the sailor's death as connected events. The experience haunted him for the rest of his life. Throughout the 1800s, sightings continued with disturbing regularity. In 1823, a British captain named George Barker reported seeing an ancient Dutch ship with tattered sails off the coast of South Africa. The vessel appeared to be on fire, glowing with an unnatural light that illuminated the entire deck. But no smoke rose from the ship, and the flames didn't spread. The apparition sailed parallel to Barker's ship for nearly 10 minutes before suddenly winking out of existence. In 1835, a whaling crew near the Cape claimed they watched the Dutchman sail directly into a cliff face and vanish. Multiple crew members testified they saw the ghost ship approaching the rocks at full speed. They shouted warnings, though they knew it was pointless. The phantom vessel struck the cliff and simply disappeared, leaving no wreckage, no debris, nothing to prove it had ever been there. The most credible mass sighting of that century happened in 1881. The crew of the HMS Inconstant, 11 sailors in total, all reported seeing the Flying Dutchman at the same time during the early morning watch. The ship appeared as a glowing phantom vessel, fully rigged with sails set, moving at impossible speed despite no wind. It crossed their path approximately 500 yards distant and disappeared into the night without a sound. The incident was documented in multiple independent testimonies, each describing the same details. And same location, same appearance, same sudden vanishing. These were trained Royal Navy sailors whose careers depended on accurate observation and reporting. But the 1939 sighting in South Africa remains the most witnessed and most credible event in the legend's entire history. It happened on a clear, calm afternoon at Glencairn Beach, just south of Cape Town. The date was March 23rd. Over 60 people were enjoying a perfect beach day. Families with children building sandcastles, couples walking along the shore, local fishermen preparing their boats. The sky was cloudless, the sea was calm, and visibility was perfect. Around 2 in the afternoon, someone pointed out to sea and screamed. Every person on that beach turned to look at what appeared to be a massive square-rigged sailing ship from the 1600s gliding across the water in full sail. The vessel wasn't on the horizon. It was close, maybe 400 yards from shore, close enough that witnesses could see individual details with perfect clarity. They could see the wooden planks of the hull, weathered and rotting. They could see the rigging, hanging in torn strips. They could see what appeared to be crew members moving about the deck, though the figures seemed translucent, like shadows cast on smoke. The ship moved in complete silence. No sound of waves against the hull. No creaking of wood or flapping of sails. Just eerie, impossible silence as this ghost from the past sailed through modern waters. Multiple witnesses grabbed cameras. A professional photographer named J.K. Langley was on the beach and managed to focus his lens on the ship. But just as he pressed the shutter, the vessel began to fade. Not sail away, not disappear over the horizon. It faded like morning mist evaporating in sunlight. Within 30 seconds, it was gone completely. The Cape Argus newspaper sent reporters to interview the witnesses. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. An old Dutch merchant vessel, three-masted, square-rigged with tattered sails. Moving against the wind with no visible means of propulsion. Close enough to see clearly but making no sound, and then vanishing without explanation. These weren't superstitious sailors telling ghost stories in a tavern. These were ordinary people, many of them educated professionals, all describing the same impossible sight in broad daylight. Local maritime experts examined the reports and concluded that no ship matching that description could have been in those waters. There were no historical reenactment vessels in the area, no film productions, no reasonable explanation for what over 60 people had witnessed at the same time. So what's really happening? Is the Flying Dutchman an actual ghost ship, cursed to sail forever? Or is there a rational explanation that accounts for 3 centuries of consistent sightings? Scientists and skeptics have proposed several theories. The most popular is called a superior mirage, also known as a fata morgana. This optical phenomenon occurs when layers of air at different temperatures create a natural lens effect that bends light in strange ways. Cold air is denser than warm air. When a layer of cold air sits beneath warm air, light passing through bends at unusual angles. This can make objects below the horizon appear to float. It can make a ship 20 miles away appear close. The image can be stretched or compressed. And when temperature layers shift, the mirage vanishes. The Cape of Good Hope is perfect for this. The cold Benguela current from Antarctica meets warm air from Africa, creating constant temperature inversions. This could explain why sightings happen in the same location, why ships appear and disappear suddenly, and why modern vessels might look ancient when distorted. But this theory has problems. Fata Morganas project images from 10 to 20 miles away. Yet many Flying Dutchman sightings describe the ship within a few hundred feet. The HMS Bacante, estimated 200 yards, are close enough to see crew members. A mirage wouldn't produce that detail at that distance. Another explanation involves bioluminescence. Certain plankton glow when disturbed, creating patches of light on the ocean. In rare cases, these can outline underwater currents or sunken wrecks, creating the illusion of a glowing ship. But bioluminescence appears as diffuse light, not solid structures with rigging and sails. It doesn't explain daytime sightings. The most disturbing theory comes from maritime historians. The waters around the Cape of Good Hope contain over 3,000 documented wrecks, many from the Dutch Golden Age. Under rare conditions, strong currents can dislodge a wreck, causing it to surface briefly before sinking again. If the ship contains air pockets, it might float for minutes, just long enough for witnesses to see it. This would explain sudden appearances and disappearances, why the ship looks ancient and damaged, and why sightings cluster around the same area. But it raises a darker question. If people are seeing a real ship surfacing, they're looking at an actual tomb. A mass grave for sailors who died centuries ago, briefly rising from the ocean floor before sinking back into darkness. But here's what we know for certain. The Flying Dutchman legend didn't start as entertainment. It started as a warning carved from real tragedy. Dutch sailors believed this story because they understood the genuine horror of the Cape of Good Hope. Between 1600 and 1800, the Dutch East India Company lost over 400 ships around the Cape. That's an average of 2 ships per year for 2 centuries. Each vessel carried 100 to 150 crew. Over 60,000 sailors drowned in these waters. The ghost ship became a symbol of that constant loss, a reminder that the ocean takes everything eventually. Decken's crime wasn't just arrogance, it was putting profit above human life. The company valued speed over safety. Captains who made faster voyages earned bonuses, even if it meant sailing into deadly storms. Decken represented the worst of this system. A captain so obsessed with speed that he sailed into a storm rather than delay by a few days. His crew begged him to turn back, and he damned them all for the sake of cargo and profit. The curse was perfect justice. He wanted to complete his voyage no matter what. So he was condemned to sail forever, unable to complete it, unable to rest, and unable to escape the consequences. Over time, the story evolved. Richard Wagner's 1843 opera turned van der Decken into a romantic figure searching for redemption through love. The Pirates of the Caribbean films transformed the Dutchman into a supernatural vessel ferrying souls between worlds. These versions are entertaining but miss the original horror. The real legend wasn't about redemption. It was about a captain who doomed his crew to eternal suffering. Sightings continue in the modern era. In 2011, a fishing crew off Cape Town reported seeing an old sailing ship appear in the fog for 3 minutes before dissolving. In 2016, a tourist captured distant footage that some claim shows the ghost ship, though skeptics argue it's a modern yacht. More intriguingly, in 2022, a research vessel detected what appeared to be a 17th century Dutch merchant ship 400 feet below the surface. When they returned 2 weeks later to investigate, the wreck had vanished. Skeptics will always find explanations. Mirages caused by temperature inversions, hallucinations triggered by isolation and stress, misidentified modern vessels seen in poor visibility, mass hysteria or shared delusion, surfacing shipwrecks or bioluminescent plankton. And maybe they're right. Maybe every single sighting over 300 years can be explained by science, psychology, and atmospheric phenomena. But that doesn't explain the consistency. Why do witnesses separated by decades and centuries describe exactly the same thing? Same location near the Cape of Good Hope. Same description of an old Dutch merchant vessel with torn sails. Same sudden appearance and disappearance. Same details about the spectral crew and the eerie silence. If these were random hallucinations or misidentifications, you would expect variation. Different ship designs, different locations, different behaviors. Instead, you get 300 years of remarkably consistent reports. It doesn't explain the credibility of the witnesses. These aren't just superstitious sailors telling stories in taverns. The Flying Dutchman was seen and documented by a future King of England, by Royal Navy officers whose careers depended on accurate reporting, by educated professionals and ordinary families on a beach in broad daylight, by fishing crews in calm weather with perfect visibility. These people had no reason to lie and everything to lose by reporting something so outlandish. It doesn't explain the deaths that followed the sightings. The sailor on the HMS Bacchante who fell to his death hours after spotting the ghost ship. The vessels that sank days after encountering the Phantom. The consistent pattern of tragedy following these encounters. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the pattern has held for centuries. The truth is, we don't know. We have theories, but no definitive proof of anything. Scientists can explain how mirages work, but can't prove that's what witnesses saw. Historians can document ship losses, but can't confirm that van der Decken's vessel is surfacing from the depths. Psychologists can describe mass hallucination, but can't explain how 60 people hallucinated the same ship in perfect daylight. And that's what makes the Flying Dutchman the most terrifying ghost ship in maritime history. Not because it's definitely supernatural, but because it exists in that uncomfortable space between the explainable and the impossible. Because it might be real. Somewhere off the coast of South Africa, in the waters near the Cape of Good Hope, something is out there. Maybe it's an optical illusion caused by temperature layers. Maybe it's a wreck surfacing from the deep. Or maybe, just maybe, Captain Hendrick van der Decken is still trying to round that cape, still refusing to turn back, still sailing through storms that should have killed him centuries ago. And if you ever find yourself near those waters, if you see an ancient ship with torn sails and glowing red light, do what sailors have done for 300 years. Look away, because some legends exist for a reason, and the Flying Dutchman doesn't forgive those who doubt.